everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
In the past, it was unknown. Like, well, I don't know what documents I need. I don't know what I need to declare this as. It's a wooden couch or a, leather with vinyl. Nobody knew what HTS code they were supposed to use, how to move things around. And it was just complicated. In our software, the KlearNow.ai software has really changed the way people can do business globally now.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Rick Tellez, co-founder of KlearNow. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
My understanding is that you are an avid sailor. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I guess almost 20 years ago now, I was introduced to sailing in the San Francisco Bay by my father-in-law now. So ultimately been on many cruises now, including an adventure from British Columbia down to San Francisco, and all the perils that come with that. But once I was introduced, it was as if day one, like skiing. I fell in love. So absolutely love it.
So tell us about the kind of different type of boats, because not all sailing boats are the same. And certainly the kind of crew and the skill set is going to differ as well, right?
Absolutely. It's with the technology, again, that's come into vessels these days. One person can man a 50-foot, sailboat. You've got electric winches, you've got autopilot, you've got a lot of things. But figure 10, 20 years ago wasn't exactly like that. You needed at least a couple of guys to pull all the sheets and move everything around. So quite significant difference between the sizes. I think the smaller ones are much easier to maneuver. And certainly when you're trying to navigate around McCovey Cove and all of the other boats during a San Francisco Giants game, that becomes an advantage. But no, there's nothing like a large yacht out there heeled over and just nothing but you and the sea.
Well, I remember being on a larger sailboat, and something about it just brings smiles to everyone that's on board. And it's just an exhilarating feeling and truly a bliss. Now, you mentioned that you've traveled from the San Francisco Bay Area to British Columbia, and I wonder if you could tell us about maybe a more adventurous tale.
Sure. One of interesting story was we had a friend of ours that had just purchased a yacht. It was a 50-foot catamaran, actually. So it's 3 holes, 2 holes, one in the middle, but ultimately he had it delivered in British Columbia out on Vancouver Island. And he asked myself if I'd like to join the crew. And certainly that was an adventure. Again, my father-in-law joined me on that, and we flew up. And once we got on the vessel, it was as if, morning one, you knew something was amiss. We were trying to beat weather, which everybody will tell you, any captain will tell you, avoid it. Just go the next day, push it 3 days, whatever you have to, but don't go through the weather. I unfortunately was working. And I said, no, I got to go now. We have to go now, or else I'll miss my window. I'll have to go back to work. It was the wrong decision, of course. And we went out into rough seas and weather, everything from the sheets snapping and taking on water and, being rescued by Coast Guard.
Wow.
It was an adventure all the way down the coast. When you're out there and you can't see land, it's a different world. And quite frankly, there was nothing like it. I wouldn't change anything, wouldn't take it back. But that trip coming down south from Vancouver Island down to San Francisco, stopping along the way at various ports on the west coast of the United States for repairs and provisions. That was it was certainly an adventure.
Well, that is something that is truly unforgettable. It's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And part of the reason I'm asking these questions is it's somewhat analogous to supply chain and the dynamics. And so supply chain and logistics, of course, every organizations and agents on different parts of the counterparties really try to precisely map things out, from timeframes to routes to all of the details. But yet it's a lot harder to get that right and get it right on a consistent basis, right? Because some things are certainly out of control. So tell us about some of the biggest issues that you see around supply chain these days.
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, there's so much that is out of their control, or previously was out of their control, right? They didn't have the data. They didn't importers, the manufacturers themselves, the people that are buying these goods and bringing them into various countries and moving them around the world. They were unable to predict what was going to happen. They were unable to, kind of see ahead of time. It's always a reactive. And so I think, one of the major problems, has been obviously the visibility. Before it was uncontrollable, now it's controllable. Not having the data, knowing when to push that vessel or which vessel to get on, have your goods on which vessel. That previously was uncontrollable. Now it's controllable. So a lot of the things that we were, let's say, hamstringed about in the past, we've been able to overcome, and that's one of the reasons why our company was created. But ultimately, I think that idea of you're sitting in one country and you've come up with a great idea, a great product, and it takes a lot to get these companies off the ground. Even a furniture company, somebody thinks that's very, very standard or simple to do, and it's not. The ideas, the designs, the back and forth of the samples between the manufacturing company and wherever the headquarters is. The movement of those things is complicated, and it requires you to go through the bureaucracy of what our man-made governments have created, right? Which is, I need to know what's leaving, what's coming. And so in the past, it was unknown. Like, well, I don't know what documents I need. I don't know what I need to declare this as. It's a wooden couch or a, leather with vinyl. Nobody knew what HTS code they were supposed to use, how to move things around. And it was just complicated. In our software, the KlearNow.ai software has really changed the way people can do business globally now.
So you're talking about things like customs, right? So unless you're in the freight forwarding business or the trade business, you're really not going to know the nuances. And if you get it wrong, then there's going to be hangups, delays, or even denials. So certainly, I think the last several years have been very interesting with COVID, as well as some of the Ukraine invasion implications as well. And certainly in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as Los Angeles port, we've seen quite a bit of queue as well. Talk about how some of these macroeconomic factors really compound the legacy issues that you're talking about as well.
Sure. I'll use a particular example. We recently went through as a globe, if you recall, Brexit, when, the easiest way to describe it for somebody outside of the industry that doesn't really know the ins and outs is to think about shipping something, ordering from Amazon when it's in a warehouse in New York and you're shipping it, having it shipped to California. Well, it's very simple, right? As a matter of fact, Amazon doesn't even charge you for it anymore. It's built in. So the package just gets shipped from New York to California. Piece of cake, right? When Brexit occurred, it was as if there were regulations overnight between California and New York. And anything leaving New York needed to be declared with the state of New York that said, this is what's leaving the state. And this is where I'm sending it. And obviously they would say, okay, it's going to California. California would then say, okay, what's coming into my state? And, oh, by the way, you're going to need to pay taxes for that, right? And there was paperwork and there's, documents and everything required in order to move something as simple from, let's say grandmother's, cashmere scarf for Christmas from New York to California, all of a sudden it became complicated and expensive. It was expensive to begin with to ship something, right? You thought you paid $100 for a scarf, and you paid $85 to ship it. Now all of a sudden you have to pay an extra $100 to clear it through customs. All of a sudden that gift became a $300 gift, right? So that you could say that that's going to impact consumer spending. That's a different topic. But what I would say is regulations and high level things that are happening between governments has complicated the supply chain, and that one particular overnight, the consumers within the UK had no idea, unless they had been buying things from outside of the EU previously. They had no idea what was required to bring something into the country. Had no idea how complicated it was. And so when you think about what we would consider from a customs declaration standpoint, the total addressable market in the UK prior to Brexit was somewhere around 22 million transactions. So 22 million customs declarations for goods coming into the country prior to Brexit. The estimate post-Brexit has been, I think it's probably around 200 to 250 million transactions now. So when you think about that problem, that the stroke of a pen has now created these massive ripple effects. And it wasn't just a ripple, it was a tsunami, right? Because you didn't have the infrastructure. If the country had, let's say, 1,000 customs brokers doing their bit of business to support the 22 million transactions that happened each year, all of a sudden they had to multiply what they were able to do overnight. And let's face it, human beings can't type that fast. It was simply not scalable. It was not possible, up to the point where legacy large freight forwarders of the world, DB Shankers and DHLs, some of the largest in the world, said, no, we have to pause. We cannot continue to bring goods into the UK until we sort this problem out. And they had, you could tell in the news, it was a wild experience for everyone. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, we were able to launch our software, KlearNow software, in the UK in time for Brexit, and we were able to relieve those customs brokers to say, listen, you don't need to go out and hire an army of 100, 200 people to do all of the data entry. You can do the same. You can have the same amount of staff, and you can multiply the number of transactions that you can do without impact to your business. So they were able to increase their revenue, meet the demand, and not increase their cost. So for that when you look at it globally, to say, listen, we know humans are complicated. They like to make things complicated, right? So with our software, anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter if somebody wakes up on the wrong side of the bed and says, I don't like France today and I want to tax your cheese, that's coming into our country a little bit more. Doesn't matter. Our software automatically recognizes that change has taken place, and it applies the applicable taxes and codes to each of those entries coming into the country without humans having to get involved or manually look things up or track things.
All right, so you've been alluding to KlearNow, but specifically, what is it, and how are you guys addressing the supply chain issues, specifically around some of these customs and clearance?
Sure. So KlearNow.ai was, we were obviously been in business for a while now, dating back to 2017, 2018. And from the inception, the premise of the company was we had to address what we considered that beachhead, that niche component of international supply chain, which was customs clearance. And the way we were going to address that problem was with the latest in technology. And from that point on, we knew that it was going to have to be the machine learning and the artificial intelligence side of the software business that was going to have to solve this, right? I was very familiar with my background in logistics of just how complicated it was, just how many human resources you needed to move the goods around the world, the complexities of the government regulations in each of these unique countries, and the in and out of all of that process. And bringing in technology experts, we were able to solve that problem by essentially creating digital assets from all of those shipping documents that are required to move goods across borders, and ultimately have the software populate fields, if you will, that would be required for government forms. So if the United States has a form that is 75 data entry points that need to be populated, typically a human being would have had to, type all of those 75 data points in by looking at all of the pieces of paper to find the right answer. Well, now those can be automatically populated, and the broker can now focus on what his or her real expertise is, which is the compliance component, right? They can really focus on what's right or wrong, advise their clients, which is the importers, which is all of us who are buying goods, and focus on that point rather than, worried about the cost of, being able to afford the labor component and to be able to support their customers. So it was really that AI ML techniques that we involved 5 years back that have now evolved, and we've been able to develop up to and including today's generative AI and other tools that have made it even more sophisticated. But let's face it, it took time, and it took a lot of documents, and it took a lot of expertise in our field to crack that code. Because as you know, before we couldn't, software wasn't able to tell the different, if you asked it, showed it a picture of a cat, it wasn't able to tell you that that's a cat, right? But we've come a long ways. And so now with the sophistication of the software and the fact that we've already been using those techniques and have the data, we were ahead of the curve, if you will, when we're now able to do what we can with software.
All right, so I'm going to come back to the AI in just a second, but let's talk a little bit about the complexities of the regulation and the tax laws. And if you think about the different governments, the domiciles, the jurisdictions, it's pretty complex. And of course, when you think about hundreds of countries that's involved, what is the way that you guys systematically are making sure that the latest tax laws and changes and customs rules are being imported and affected into the system so that it's as accurate and in compliant as possible?
Absolutely. So I think if there's an HTS guide book that is published by CBP, which is our U.S. government under Department of Homeland, which regulates the goods or monitors the goods coming into the country. It's about, I'd say, 18 inches tall. If you print it out every page and had it on a table. I think we did that day one, and we put it on one of our shelves to remind ourselves every day that's what we're targeting. That is the problem we're solving. What it would require is if there was a change, let's say in one of those thousands of pages of documents, a human being would get an email from a US government, right, saying, this particular HTS code has changed. The value of duties and taxes assessed on those goods have changed. If it's coming from Vietnam, the rules have changed. If it's coming from China, it's now, 20% tariff. Any type of change that occurred affects that huge stack of papers, right? And so in the past, you would get that paper, you would go to the page affected, you would take out the old page, you'd replace it with the new page. And then when those goods came across the border, you'd flip through that massive manual, which you've broken up into sections now, and you would have to look, the customs broker would have to look at that section and say, okay, this is what's applicable. This is how it's handled. These are the country origins that enjoy, let's say, a tariff agreement with the United States, or UK would say, yeah, we have special, arrangements with these 5 countries for this particular commodity. Anyway, it didn't matter what country you were in. It was manual. It was paper-based. You had to look at those documents in order to understand, to your point, what is the country of origin, destination, what are the trade agreements between those 2 countries, what are for that particular commodity, then what is the duties and taxes that should be assessed? Is there, any type of restriction on how much can be brought into the country? I mean, it's very complicated. And a human being would have to go through that if they hadn't memorized it and just knew it through muscle memory over 20, 30 years of doing the business. They would have to go to that book and research it every time. What our software has done is we have, with AI, we're able to scan through that 18 inches worth of documents, in very short order, you're able to search all different sources that would generate those new rules or updates. And you're able to piece together data from multiple sources, bring it into one centralized location, which is our platform, and then be able to say, okay, I know the trade agreement between China and UK. I know the trade agreement between Canada and Mexico. I know the trade agreements between any country pairing. I know for every commodity what any possible variation of the HTS code and or duty and tax rate could be. And it becomes instantaneous, as opposed to this very laborious process of having to manually look through documents either online or in a notebook to determine what the right code and what the right tax is to assign it to, and all the while trying to submit all of that information to the respective government that it's going to. And make no mistake, all of the governments are the same in that fashion. They all have their very unique restrictions, their very unique requirements on what they need to be able to process and allow something to come into their country. So it's not unique to any one country, and they're all pretty much on par.
Well, as I'm listening, I'm just thinking the first initial years when you guys are developing this product, it must have been pretty hairy, because it starts with a pretty complex data model that has to tune for the fact that the definition of a particular, let's say, a metadata or concept, a business object, is going to be slightly different from countries to countries. So you have to be able to have equivalents or different types of way to combine those metadata into a singular business object. So I could see a lot of challenges. And of course, you're talking about, when you're talking about AI, it's fundamentally OCR or computer vision aspects. So of course, that's been progressing pretty rapidly over the last 10 years. And certainly, I think we've kind of come a long way. Fortunately or unfortunately, you're talking about mostly structured data, right? Because they are, for the most part, it's in a tabular format, so it knows to scan for that. And then once you have that database in place, then you're looking for the delta for any type of change that is effective. So I see that the first several years must have been pretty difficult. How do you go about actually properly testing to make sure that what the system is capturing and then what it's all pre-populating is in fact accurate?
Well, that's a great question, right? Because, how do you know the answer? One of the ways we were able, and this is why very early on, our primary objective was to make sure that we could communicate directly with those governments, right? We knew that by utilizing a middleware or a third-party software in order to submit these transmissions or data and documents to the respective government, if we had a third party in the middle, we'd be restricted. One, we'd be restricted on the level of technology that they have and that they have based their platform on. And we knew that we were already beyond that. So having any kind of lesser intelligent software between ours and the government was not going to be advantageous to us. And ultimately, they could throttle you if indeed you became truly a competitor. So by going through that process of becoming an certified ABI software provider, for starting with the United States and then through CBSA with Canada and UK and again, Spain, Netherlands, all of these countries directly, what we've been able to do is they do provide what we would consider, software world, we would consider a sandbox, right? And so they make you go through it. I believe it was around 86 tests that you had to undergo. Now, part of those tests were they would throw you different examples or situations. They would test your software, right? So it was very unique in that sense because they wanted to make sure that they're not dealing with just anybody that can submit data to them and then say, no, this is wrong, kick it back, and it creates a lot of work for the government or the error rates and the rejection rates and customs brokers, at least in the United States, are judged by how many error rates or rejection rates they've gotten by something that they've done incorrectly. So you didn't want to be on that red list, if you will. But with that test environment and with that sandbox, we were able to develop our software outside and then, okay, now let's test it. Let's see randomly, let's pick a commodity, let's pick an origin country, let's pick some, and you could do it across verticals. So automotive, food, biotech. I mean, it didn't really matter. You could pick it from anywhere and then push the data points to the government, and it would automatically tell you, it would say, yes, that's correct, or no, it's not. Within the system, we would be able to bounce pings back and forth to understand whether or not codes were current or not. And a lot of that happens in the back end now anyway, where with our database, we already kind of have what we would say the foundation is. And so really you compare against that, which is constantly being compared to any changes that are being made by the governments themselves. So it was really, to your point, a very complex and difficult problem to solve. We were very fortunate early on to have incredible advisors, and we're able to get some really amazing software engineers to understand and see the vision years back, when, if you thought about it, there was no way an AI or senior software engineer, 6 years ago would have even considered working for a logistics software company, right? I mean, they were doing something cool with, Facebook or Google or any of the other, hot social media companies that were out there back then. They wanted to be involved with that, and we were able to explain the vision to a select few that really truly understood and joined, and it's been an incredible success since then.
All right, so we are out of time, and just as a concluding remark is that certainly from a productivity spike, this is incredibly valuable for a customs broker, but at the same time, it lessens, kind of weakens the value that they provide as well. So again, we're out of time, but I'm curious to know, potential down the road, disintermediation, further opportunity for KlearNow. So I've been joined by Rick Tellez, co-founder of KlearNow. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.